The most powerful way to manifest is feeling that it's already here. And that can only rise out of the fullness of being, of presence in the present moment, because then you merge the image of what you want with a sense of fullness, the fullness of being. So the image and the fullness of being come together, and that is a powerful way of manifesting. The point of power is always in the present moment. A great obstacle for achieving a vision or any success is to have an excessive attachment to the outcome. That's a huge hindrance. In order to achieve mastery in anything, you have to focus your mind and you have to enjoy what you're doing for quite some time before power flows into what you do.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I watch these videos every day because I need them for motivation. Being around successful entrepreneurs every morning helps me believe that I can do great things too. It's like your morning coffee, but for your goals, kickstarting your day with a blast of positivity. So here is a challenge for you. Try watching one video every morning for the next 30 days, and let's find out together if they help you do great things too. If you're in, leave a hashtag BELIEVE in the comments below so I can celebrate with you. So today, let's get some incredible motivation from the one and only Eckhart Tolle. Enjoy.
Manifesting doesn't always mean that you have a clear vision of what it is that you want to achieve. Sometimes that is fine and works. But to be in a state of appreciation of life, in deep alignment with the present moment, so that you're not in an antagonistic relationship with the present moment anymore. You're just deeply aligned with the flow of life in the now, and you appreciate everything that is, and the things you do. The things you do them fully. You give your fullest attention to what you do. That's another obstacle for many people. They somehow are not able to give themselves fully. There's something holding back. There's something that's holding them back. You can sometimes see it with people who are on stage, or sometimes singers or musicians. You can sometimes see the full energy is not there for some reason. Perhaps they're afraid for some reason they may be afraid of giving themselves fully. To be fully in what you're doing, to give your fullest attention to what you're doing in the present moment, is a very powerful way of manifesting. But whether or not you have a vision that you project and you feel it's already happening, the vision can only work if you continue giving your fullest attention to the present moment and to enjoy the energy of what it is that you are producing in the present moment. That empowers the vision. The vision is always, the point of power is always in the present moment. A great obstacle for achieving a vision or any success is to be, and this almost sounds paradoxical at first until you begin to understand it, is to have an excessive attachment to the outcome. That's a huge hindrance. Now you might think, well, if I have a vision of what it is I want to achieve, would it not be natural for me to be attached to the outcome that I want to get there? I want to reach millions of people with my music, and I want to make millions of people to feel better by listening to my music, perhaps to get a glimpse of presence by listening to my music. It's a great vision, but the mastery of this lies in not attaching yourself to the vision, so that you lose consciousness in what you are doing, and it gets dissipated into the vision, which ultimately is a mental thing. The point of power is always in the present moment. Excessive attachment to the outcome, one could almost say any real attachment to the outcome weakens your ability to manifest. So you can hold an outcome in your mind and then return to I give the example of a pilgrimage. Let's say you're on a pilgrimage. Life could be regarded as a pilgrimage or journey. And you know where you're going. You want to go to whatever it is. You pilgrimage to a holy site. In medieval times, there were pilgrimages to Rome and other sacred places. You pilgrimage to Mecca, pilgrimage in Spain. You can go on this pilgrim trail in northern Spain to Santiago de Compostela, and you walk for many, many days. Now, the very purpose of pilgrimage is to bring about a transformation of who you are, transformation of consciousness. The arriving is relatively unimportant. Arriving at your destination is just a short moment, and there you are. But the journey is, how conscious are you of the step you're taking at this moment? If you're excessively attached to the outcome, which in this case would be your destination, then you're mentally, you already want to be there. That takes away from the quality of your step at this moment. Now, the step stands, it's an analogy for whatever it is you're doing at this moment. And quality means how much consciousness flows into what you're doing in this moment. Sometimes people try to exercise willpower when they try to manifest what I want this, whatever it is. That is not necessarily a good way to manifest, because by saying I want it, you're also saying that you don't have it yet. But the most powerful way to manifest is the feeling that it's already here. And that can only rise out of the fullness of being, of presence in the present moment, because then you merge the image of what you want with a sense of fullness, the fullness of being. So the image and the fullness of being come together, and that is a powerful way of manifesting it, which means you don't need that thing for your happiness anymore. You don't need it for your ultimate fulfillment. The most powerful way to manifest is to regard it as a play or a game, the game of life, the play of life, of manifesting. Then there's also a sense of detachment from the outcome. An excessive attachment to the desired outcome is also an obstacle to manifesting. If you desperately need something, if you are unhappy, if you are unhappy if you don't get it, then there's something wrong. So if you're unhappy when you don't achieve whatever you want to manifest, then that you didn't do it right. So there needs to be a detachment, so to speak, from the desired outcome, so that you don't project this whatever you want to manifest doesn't become a future projection, but whatever you want to manifest needs to be realized as already existing on some level in the unmanifested. That's why Jesus said, I always go back to Jesus, because whatever you want to learn about manifestation, just read what he explained it all in very simple words. He said, whenever you pray for something, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. That's the entire secret of manifestation already there. And the importance of the words are not believe that you will receive it, because then there would be too much wanting. I want this, I will get it. No, he said, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours, and it will be given to you. So believing that you have, in other words, it's already there. And you can, and how does that happen? How does it happen when you know, when your senses tell you that it's not there? Let's say you live in a trailer. There's nothing wrong with living in a trailer. I love trailers. But let's say you live in a trailer, but you want a nice house. Okay, your preference would be a nice house, but are you unhappy in your trailer, or are you appreciate being in a trailer and you can hear the pitter-patter of rain on the roof? Well, I can hear it now. I'm not in a trailer, I can still hear it from the window pane. So in a trailer, but you want a nice house. Okay, where is the house? Well, because you look around, it's not here. I'm living in it. Are you creating some kind of dissatisfaction by telling yourself a story? This is what my life has come to. I'm reduced to living in a trailer. I need to get out of here. This is all disempowering. All those narratives, telling yourself stories that's not good enough, all very disempowering. Yes, your senses are telling you that you're not living in a nice house, you're just in a trailer. But that's fine for the present moment. So where's the house? The house is in your imagination, in your mind. Maybe you visualize it, or maybe you have certain verbal affirmations that you have a lovely house that you live in. And then the visualization and the verbal affirmation, you bring it together, allow the visualization or the verbal affirmation to be empowered by that sense of presence. So it meets the presence. So that house merges with the sense of presence. And then inside you feel you already have it. And the weird thing is when you do get it, let's say next year or in 6 months' time or in 2 years' time or in 3 years' time, when you do get it, and then suddenly you sit in your nice house, it makes no difference to your inner state anymore, because when you were in your trailer, you were already in the same state of fullness of life when you're in a nice house. And then you sit in a nice house and say, okay, it's fine. But you're not, you say, yes, a certain amount of satisfaction may be there, but basically, your inner state is the same as it was before, because you already touched the full, you already rooted in the beingness, the dimension of being, the fullness of life. In other words, when it does manifest, you don't suddenly become, oh, I'm so happy, I got it, oh, finally I got it. No, that doesn't happen anymore. You say, oh, it's good. But your inner state is the same as it was before. No matter what you achieve, you already have the foundation for everything. You're already rooted in that. This is why Jesus called it, all these things will be added unto you. It's no more than that, an adding. Or use the expression, icing on the cake. And when you have an enormous sense of freedom, of liberation, because your inner state is no longer dependent on external conditions. When you read what Jesus said, when you have Faith is the faith in the terms that Jesus used is to be connected with the power within you that is inseparable from the source, consciousness. When you have faith, you can tell a mountain, move from here to there, and it will happen. Now, there could be a kind of parable or analogy, or some people might want to take it literally. He also said, as you know, I've said before, the one statement that encapsulates the entire secret about manifestation. Jesus said, when you ask for something, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. They just encapsulate. Believe that you have received it. I've spoken about that at length in other sessions. To believe that you have received it is to feel connected with the essence of being, where anything else that's the cream, everything else is the skimmed milk. So if you have the cream, you can manifest anything in the realm of the skimmed milk. Now, that would mean that you can entirely change. If the statement about the mountain is to be taken literally, then it would be you're saying that it is possible to completely change external reality, so-called physical reality, simply by the power of your mind. And I believe that is the destiny of humans. Eventually, humans will be able to simply manifest through the mind. If that were if at the moment, no, to some a few, you can manifest quite a bit. Not immediately. You always need a little bit of time. Mostly, there's a lot you can do. And even sometimes things that you think might be almost impossible, that's too far, that is possible to manifest. But there are limitations, you're absolutely right, and you need to recognize those limitations so that you are not engaged in completely useless manifestation practice, aiming at something that is not within the realm of possibility. For example, let's say I suddenly got it into my mind that I'm going to participate in whatever capacity in the Olympic Games, the next Olympic Games, whenever they are going to be, and I'm going to win a gold medal in boxing or whatever, or jumping or whatever it is. And no matter how powerful my manifestation is, that is not going to happen. So I know that is an impossibility. Or let's say I got it into my mind, I want to become the world's greatest ballet dancer. Okay. Now, if I'd been 10 years old, it might have worked, but it's not going to happen, that's for sure, no matter how powerful my manifestation practice is. So there are, now these things are kind of obvious, that there are physical limitations to what you can do or what your body can do. There may also be mental manifestations. Sometimes people have an image in their mind of what they want to be, but I remember watching years ago, when we still had cable television, American Idol. Now, American Idol is all these people who perform. They want to be chosen as the next American Idol in all kinds of singing and dancing and so on. And one is sometimes amazed at the discrepancy between what people thought of themselves, how good they were at singing or dancing, and how bad they actually were when they performed. It's just the discrepancy was just incredible. They thought they were the potential greatest singer, but they were just awful. Just everybody could see they can now. That's now that could be that they haven't practiced enough. It could be that they forgot that in order to achieve mastery in anything, you have to focus your mind and you have to enjoy what you're doing for quite some time before power flows into what you do. So they have just a mental projection. I'm going to be a rock star. But then there's the practice. You have to live it. You have to live the music. You have to live, or you compose the music and you live it every day. And you live, your instrument becomes part of your very being, and you live it, and you enjoy it. And then you go into the subway and you play there for a year or two. And then you go somewhere else to a little bar and you play there. So many great stars have started, and then you live. And there was this book, I can't remember the title. He found when he looked at the various great musicians and dancers who had achieved great things, he calculated that they had 10,000 hours of practice before mastery was achieved, and something was able to flow through them that made them great. With the Beatles, for example, he examined for how many years the Beatles performed in just little bars, and in Liverpool and then in Hamburg. They were performing in little beer cellars and tiny bars, and he calculated, and he came to the average figure of 10,000 hours, 10,000 hours of practice, and that's so. Very often, the people don't achieve. The goal may not be totally unrealistic. It may be within the realm of possibility, but what they miss is the journey towards the goal, and they don't enjoy the journey, and they don't want to. The energy is not there to practice every day, to do every day, so that the power increases and flows through them. Now, quite a few of those people, they never consciously manifested something. The Beatles, I'm sure, it just was a gradual evolutionary process for them before what they created was very deeply inspiring. I mean, the songs are relatively simple, but they have an essence. There's something there that makes them, that they'll still be around in 200 or 300 years' time. There's something there that suddenly came, and it wasn't there initially. So are you able to enjoy the doing in the present moment? Really comes back to the present moment. Do you enjoy the journey towards it? Let's say you want to become people have an image of what they want to become, but are not able to give it attention in the present moment, so that the journey must be joyful to be empowered. So many things are possible. Now, even people who seem to have a very bad voice, that say this person could never sing, that's not necessarily true. If this person continues, it could happen that something will become through. Look at somebody like who was this jazz singer, very famous African-American, very famous jazz singer, who had this deep, croaky voice. the name escaped me right now. One of the most famous, Louis Armstrong, I think. Was he a jazz singer?
Mm-hmm.
Was he? I think he was.
Yeah.
So he had this, and you would say, could this person ever have a singing career? It's totally impossible. But the strange thing is, everybody would have said, there's no chance for you, just do something else. When he did, eventually something happened. It didn't matter anymore that this wasn't would not normally regarded as a good singing voice. There was an essence that came through him that used the voice and touched everybody. So that was incredible. And if this person had asked anybody, I want to be a singer, and says, okay, here's what you can do, please think of something else. So often it is the case, and I don't know, I haven't read his biography, I don't know what his past was, what his journey was, but it's amazing that somebody who has such a bad singing voice can create such wonderful songs. Quite amazing. So there are incredible possibilities that the mind would exclude by saying prematurely. So many things are possible, but some things are not possible, often involving, as the examples I gave for myself. I think to get a medal in the Olympic Games, there may be one or two disciplines that I could still be good at, who knows? One could be, that's a favorite Canadian discipline called curling, where you push that thing on the ice. It doesn't require too much physical strength, so there might be a chance for me participating in the Canadian team of curling, but I doubt it. That's a little aside. Yes, knowing what is possible, but without limiting yourself, as in the example of Louis Armstrong, he would have done if he had listened to others and said, who probably told him, your voice is no good. If he had listened to others, and he didn't, fortunately. And when I was writing The Power of Now, people sometimes ask me, what do you do? And I said, I'm writing a book, spiritual book. And they say, what about? I said, it's about present moment, living in the present moment. And several times people said, oh, forget about it. It's been done so many times. This is something that's already been overdone. You should think of something else. This possibly present moment is old hat. Just don't do it. There's no point. You're wasting your time. Somebody actually told me, literally, he had read many spiritual books and said, if you are writing another book about the present moment, you're wasting your time. And I was writing The Power of Now. I didn't listen to him. I knew I wasn't wasting your time. I loved the process. There was an empowerment that happened. It didn't matter to me very much whether the book would be successful or not, which was very much secondary. I knew the book had to be written. If I had not written it, I would have become ill and I would have died. That's how strong the energy flow was. If I had not responded to it, I would have died or become seriously ill. So don't necessarily listen to others. But yes, it is true. On the one hand, there are things that are not possible. For example, physical flying right now is not yet possible, at least not in this dimension. You can probably fly in the astral dimension. You can, and when you dream, you might travel to the astral dimension and experience, as I sometimes do, that you actually lift off and you can, there you go. But in this dimension, I would not step off my balcony and jump off or start practicing flying. I don't recommend it. Certain things are impossible, and you need to just use your discrimination and look at it without limiting yourself unduly, because many things that other people might tell you are impossible are actually within the realm of possibility. And even certain things that your mind will tell you are impossible may be within the realm of possibility. And again, there's a fine line there. Important thing is make sure that you enjoy the doing of it. And then you focus on your destination, but enjoy the doing in the present moment. And then whether or not you even arrive at your destination becomes secondary, because there's such deep enjoyment in the present moment. Whatever you want to manifest in this world, people want what they want, better, more abundance in their life, perhaps material abundance. There's a shortage of money. You want to experience an expansion on this in this dimension, fine. Or they want to find some companion in their life, or they may want better health, or a better way of contributing to this world, as the expression goes, to make a difference in this world. They want to be a positive force in this world. These are all wonderful things. But the primary thing is to touch that, to not touch just deeper, to access that dimension within yourself and stay rooted in that dimension of being, of presence. That in itself is so fulfilling that anything you can manifest becomes, the English expression, if English is not your native language, I don't know if you've heard the expression, the icing on the cake. The icing on the cake is the stuff you put on top of you have a cake. Icing on the cake is the stuff you put on top of the cake, little ornaments, and to make the cake look nice. It's the icing on the cake. But it's not, the cake itself is more important than the icing on the cake. So, so the icing on the cake is that the state of the realization of being. That is this. Sorry, that is the cake. The icing is whatever you manifest. Jesus said the same thing. He didn't actually use, he was not familiar with English, and the expression icing on the cake didn't exist. I don't know whether they even had cake at that time, but Jesus used the expression, seek only the kingdom of heaven. Everything else that you may think that you need will be added unto you. Seek only the kingdom of heaven. Everything else will be added unto you. It's only an addition. It's not the main thing. So whatever in this life, whatever you may want to achieve, it's an adding on to the main thing. The main thing is the kingdom of heaven, which is the realization of being, the realization of that which transcends the person or the personality, the realization of being is the I am, without adding anything to it, presence itself. And so then that's the foundation for all manifestation. Then out of that power
Maybe some people like to visualize the situation. Others may want to use verbal affirmations, and that's fine. But as you use those things, you stay connected with that dimension. So, and that means when you want something in life, the wanting is very different from the egoic wanting, because you don't need it to be fulfilled or happy. So it's the different kind of wanting. You don't need it to be fulfilled. The fulfillment you have to find in the present moment. You have to go deep enough into the present moment so you find. And again, quoting Jesus again, because he talked about it, in the present moment you find what he called the fullness of life. That's actually an expression that Jesus used. He said, I want you to have the fullness of life. In some translations, it's called abundant life. I want you to have abundant life. In other translations, it's, I want you to have the fullness of life. And that fullness of life does not mean many things. It means that the essence of life itself, that is the fullness of life. Then all those things that you may want will be added, well, maybe not all of them, but many of things will be added unto you.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight our favorite lessons from the video that will inspire you to remember what you learned today and actually apply them. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there.
First, you see the need to be a victim. Identity also, unfortunately, is a form of ego. Because any conceptual identity is a form of ego. And even though you seem to be amply justified in having a victim identity because of the things that other humans did to you, you yourself are finding yourself in a kind of prison that created by your mind. So there's no denial of that bad things happen to you, yes. Now, question is, how do you exit this mental prison? The first step is perhaps to see that unconscious human beings in the grip of their own conditioning, their own ego, they have virtually no free will. When you are unconscious, you are controlled by the mind patterns that are lodged in your psyche. You cannot really speak of free will by somebody who has zero awareness, and yet their entire makeup is conditioning from the past. So the famous phrase used by Jesus in connection with forgiveness on the cross, he said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Now, these two interesting, these points put together, forgive them. Why forgive them? They know not what they do. In other words, if he had spoken these days, using our terminology, he probably would have said, they are completely unconscious. Because that's what it means, they know not what they do. They are completely unconscious. So when you see nobody can act beyond their level of consciousness, then you see that it's almost like, it becomes almost like the evil that was perpetrated becomes almost like a natural phenomenon. That is, like you've been hit by lightning or something, or lived in very unpleasant climatic conditions that injured you, near a volcano. My dad had problems with anger, huge outbursts of anger quite frequently. It was living next to a volcano that could erupt at any moment. And he could not help it. It was impossible. There was no possibility of being different. And so these humans are run by unconscious conditioning, usually goes back to their childhood and what happened there. I know why my father was angry. I realized much later that it all originated in his childhood, the reasons why he was so angry. And also, for a while, also I felt a resentment towards that. And only when I was able to awaken out of egoic consciousness, I saw that there's nothing that he could have done differently because there wasn't enough awareness. Now, when you see that, then you don't personalize or you don't create an identity for other humans out of their unconsciousness, because in essence, that's not who they are. The recognition that there's first recognition, then step one, you recognize that no human can act beyond their conditioning in the absence of awareness. If there's awareness, they can transcend their conditioning. And then they begin to become conscious of their own conditioned mental-emotional, dysfunctional mental-emotional patterns. Yes. So they can't help it. So that's already a useful step in forgiveness. But you may not yet be able to arrive at full forgiveness because of that. Before I continue with that, does that mean then, a question may arise in your mind, does that mean then humans are not really responsible for what they do? If they are unconscious, how are they responsible? And does that mean then that we shouldn't punish them for what they do? If they commit a crime, are they not guilty? That's an interesting question. The unconsciousness that operates in human, even if you are able to forgive a human, and we'll go more fully into that in a minute, even if you're able to forgive a human for their transgressions or whatever they did, this does not mean, and even though the human is not responsible for their unconsciousness, and yet it is built into the structure of human life, they still need to suffer the consequences of their unconsciousness. So part of this is, of course, to give more attention to the present moment, because the more you think, the more future you generate. And the more attention you give to the present moment, the less thinking. Because to be really present, you don't think about it, you just are with it, give it attention. I recommend the little things of life to be more attentive to all the little things that make up every hour of every day, every minute, every hour, and give them more attention. Walking steps, one step at a time. Objects that you're handling, all the time you're handling objects in your life. You're always touching something, putting something here and there. Is everything that you handle just a means to an end, or are you able to just appreciate the simple presence or even of a so-called inanimate object? Contemplation also of all the lovely things that make up your environment, part of your environment. For example, if I were sitting here alone, let's say I'm waiting for everybody to arrive, I might be sitting here looking, of course, at the flower, sense the stillness, and then there's a glass table here, and then there's a glass of water here, and there's a clock and a bell and tissues, and they all reflect the light in different ways. There's a little bit of a rainbow effect in the glass of water here, and then the lights are reflected on the bells, almost like a mirror, and there's the clock ticking away. It's a beautiful scene. Sometimes you go to an art gallery, well, not so much with modern art, but a very favorite thing would be still life artists. And it took a while in art before they discovered the artists in the history of art, before they discovered the seemingly insignificant things and started to give attention to those. Before that happened, they were very much interested in the huge things, the saints or the kings or the huge battle scenes or the big, they painted those things, or the important people, or some dramatic thing, the volcanic eruption or whatever, a fire. And then at some point they started to discover the beauty and the incredible sense of the quality that is in the little things. Perhaps after these artists depicted relatively seemingly insignificant things, perhaps it motivated some people to give more attention to that. But even now, it's still, people very much overlook that, and you overlook then a large part of your life. You don't give it attention. When I say give attention, there's an element of appreciation of everything, of the little things. And you begin to realize that your entire life consists mainly of little things. In this world, dealing with things, creating things, achieving things. And being is about being aware of the present moment. Which, after all, is all you ever have. Whatever you achieve through becoming in the future eventually turns into the present moment. So as I speak to you, the meditation, if we even want to call it that, it's perhaps best to forget about the word. As I speak, be aware of the silence or the stillness between the words. Being aware means just notice that it's there. It's very simple. So you notice that in addition to the words, there's another dimension that is easily overlooked, and that's the dimension of stillness, which we could also call space or spaciousness. So when you notice that there are two, so to speak, two dimensions here, the dimension of words, which you hear and which then become thoughts in your head, and the dimension of no thing, spaciousness. And you just notice, that's all that's required, that there is that dimension also present, so you notice it in between words and even behind the words, so to speak. Now when you notice it, what happens inside you? What does it mean to notice the stillness? Be aware of the stillness. It means you have become still inside. It means you're conscious, but at that moment, at this moment, you're not thinking. But you're alert, present, completely here, but not thinking. So, that's the realization of the dimension of depth within you.
In presence, all this, what I sometimes call unnecessary baggage that people manufacture mentally and emotionally, all that unnecessary baggage that really there's a heaviness to it that they carry around, doesn't arise anymore, and there's the simple, this is what is, I can either do this or I can do that, I can deal with it now, I can put it aside. No story. But this is frustrating to the ego, because when there's no longer any story where you oppose the other, where you make yourself feel superior to the other, then there's no food for the ego anymore. But there's an incredible lightness, and the lightness of being comes, and the heaviness goes out of situations that really, that's what the ego is, a heavy me. And even when it attempts to make itself superior, what it doesn't recognize
is that all these are really forms of suffering. The ego doesn't even recognize suffering as suffering. It doesn't realize that when you get angry or irritated about somebody else's behavior and bring up a big story about it, you are actually in a state of suffering. If you were able to have attention in your body, you would notice that your body is suffering, because those things affect the smooth, harmonious working of the energy field that goes through the body. So an angry thought has an effect on the body. Small irritation or has an effect, and the body doesn't really like it. But the ego, the egoic self, is not in touch with the body, so it mistakes suffering for something good. Anger can really get into this. So you can look at your own life and see where you are manufacturing unnecessary stories, both in small situations and in bigger life situations, and in situations to do with relatives, family members, partners, ex-partners, a wonderful source of egoic stories. Can talk about your ex-husband or wife for hours, either to somebody else if they're ready to listen, or in your own mind. Or you had a confrontation or an exchange with somebody yesterday, and you can go on, continue that in your mind and say so many hurtful things to the other person that unfortunately you couldn't think of in the situation. But you can relive it now, and it's almost as good as the real thing. So in that fantasy world of the mind, you can be right again and again, and the other person can be wrong again and again. How wonderful. These things are not, all this is what we call unconscious. So people don't know what they are doing. For them, that is their reality. The Tao, or consciousness in its pure form, is pure no form before it becomes something, before it becomes a thought or words. So right now, you're aware of sense perceptions, because you can still see me. You're aware of the words, but more importantly, you are aware that you are aware. You know yourself as this aware presence, space. Without that space, that aware space, there would be no sense perception. It is the light of consciousness in which all the objects of consciousness are perceived. Most people are not aware of themselves as consciousness. They're only aware of the objects that arise in consciousness. And their sense of identity also, their sense of who they are, ultimately is an object that arises in their consciousness. That's me. This is my story, me and my story, my identity. I am this and that and all those things together, that's me. But they're all thought forms or emotional forms that arise in consciousness. They are an object in consciousness. And this object in consciousness, for most people, is the foundation of their sense of identity. But that, unfortunately, is an enormous limitation and ultimately a misperception of who they actually are. Most people's sense of identity, therefore, is based on a misperception, because who you truly are is not an object in consciousness. That's ephemeral. It is here for a while, then it evaporates. Who you truly are is the space of consciousness itself. And so you become aware of an underlying presence, just to use a word, a wakefulness. A certain alertness, a stillness, but not a stillness that is asleep, an alert stillness. That's the realization of consciousness, of yourself as consciousness. How you respond, and that, if you are, we can use the two words, react, respond. The way I use them is, react means it's a karmically determined reaction. You react out of the conditioning of your mental emotional field. Response implies that you are present and your action is no longer determined by the mental emotional conditioning of the person. There is a higher intelligence, one could say, or I call it wisdom, but in other words, there's a higher intelligence that can then operate in your daily life. A higher intelligence, which we could call wisdom. So it's not the conventional intelligence that you can measure in IQ tests. That's a very limited version of intelligence. There's a higher intelligence that comes in through presence, that deals more intelligently with any situation that arises in your life. That's the only possible way of dealing intelligently, is by dealing with the situation through presence. Especially important, of course, in human relationships, because there's so much unconsciousness that happens in the interaction between human beings, between two human beings and larger numbers of human beings, and then groups of collectives of millions of human beings here and another million there and there. Or there's, you can see when you look at politics and affairs and so what's happening in the world, there's very little intelligence, the way they deal with things. And you're amazed. How can they be so short-sighted and ultimately have to use a simple word, stupid? But these people have degrees, they have university degrees. How can they be so stupid? Well, they only activated a very limited version of intelligence that you can measure in IQ tests. That's not enough. I'm sorry, I don't want to offend anybody who has a very high IQ, or is a member of this. There's an organization called Mensa, I believe. So if you have a very IQ, you can be a member of that, and that's good for your identity, of course. So I don't want to take anything away from you, but that is not real intelligence. It's a form of intelligence, but it's a relatively low form of intelligence. A much higher intelligence comes in through presence, and that is lacking in the world. There are occasionally you see, very rarely you see a politician actually, you can see, oh, this person has some real intelligence and insights, and it's usually not the people who are running things. If it's a politician, it's usually somebody who's been pushed to the periphery of politics, and from there he used to see comments on the stupidity of what's happening in the world. I've observed it's in different countries a similar phenomenon. There are a few people here and there who can see clearly where we are going and what we're doing. It's crazy. Because there is a lack of this higher intelligence that is beyond the egoic mind. And, at the moment it doesn't look good because we're going on. I was going to use that weird expression about the hand basket again. So you can see it. Now it's important when you look at the state of the world, it's important that you do not enter a reactive mode, because that will draw you into unconsciousness. If you watch too much television or current affairs, you will be drawn into most likely unconsciousness, unless you watch it as an anthropological study of how misguided humanity can be. So you need to stay present while you look at all this and see what's happening. Question may arise, shouldn't I be doing something to, there may be something you can do, bring some sanity into this world, perhaps through saying something, speaking out, pointing out something, not creating enemies. If you see people are deluded in what they say or do, don't make them into enemies and attack them and say, you are totally crazy. No, it may be that what they do maybe and probably is dysfunctional and stupid, or the opinions they hold may be extremely misguided and irrational. So you can address the opinions that they hold, their mental positions, and point out the irrationality and so on, without making the people who hold their opinion into enemies. So don't equate the mental positions that people hold with who they essentially are. You can speak out, maybe you can post something on one of the many platforms that are available, something that is sane rather than insane. But perhaps you can post something that points out the insanity of it all. Some people do that, so that's a good thing. Now,
because some people may suddenly say, oh yes, that's true. So higher intelligence comes in, and that can then deal with situations, and that's the end of karma. What humanity is doing now collectively is karma playing itself out, the movement of unconsciousness. And so, as we mentioned yesterday with reference to individuals, you remember we talked about responsibility. Can you hold a person responsible for what they do if they are unconscious? We talked about that yesterday. If they are in the grip of their mental emotional conditioning, that's their karma. Can you hold a karmic formation person? Can you hold a karmic formation responsible for what they do? Not really. So there's a deep wisdom in what Jesus said, forgive them for they know not what they do. Forgiveness means the realization that they are not responsible, they cannot do otherwise. But we also, and this also applies to the collective, what all the politicians are doing and so on. They don't know any better. They are in the grip of egoic reactivity and short-sightedness that comes with it, and so on. But as is the case with individuals, although they may not be and cannot be held responsible, and yet they have to suffer the consequences of their unconsciousness. This is how humans ultimately awaken. They are not responsible, they still have to, they create suffering for themselves and others, and through the suffering that's created by the unconsciousness, an awakening happens. So, in other words, the ego is necessary for the awakening to happen. The ego ultimately self-destructs. It has built into it a self-destruct function. That is ultimate wisdom. So that's also applies to the collective. Already, if you look at the 20th century, the wars that happened and the internal conflicts in countries that happened, the countless millions upon millions killed by other humans, what they did, the terrible suffering. This is all the movement of unconsciousness. They don't know what they do, and then they suffer. Humanity suffers and suffers and suffers. Through the suffering, gradually, an awakening happens. So the ego's dysfunction creates suffering. And ultimately, the suffering acts as an awakener. It's just a question of how much longer is the suffering going to go, and what's the next stage, you may ask, on the scale of collective suffering. I don't know, but it doesn't look good at the moment. But you are here to represent, to embody the higher intelligence. I mean, hopefully you don't make that into a mental concept. I embody the higher intelligence. It is true, but it should not become a mental concept that you identify with. And so the sanity, you embody the sanity in a world that is still predominantly, one has to say, insane in many ways. Not all of it is insane, but a lot of it, some important parts are insane. So let's then see whatever comes is maybe bad from a lower perspective, doesn't look good,
But ultimately, everything that happens is in the service of the evolution of consciousness, even in your own life. And if it applies in your own life, it also applies to the collective of humanity. In this world, you have to be careful with what kind of thoughts you absorb from the collective, because there's so much unhappiness in the collective energy field of humanity. So it's very easy to get drawn into that if you're not careful and participate in the suffering of the collective. Fear, anxiety, anger, that's everywhere. It's also very easy to be affected by certain thoughts that can take over your mind, that come from the collective, thoughts and thought patterns. Anybody who is not sufficiently present, sufficiently aware, is susceptible to being infected by certain thoughts. The mind, certain thoughts become lodged in your mind. Every thought is an energy formation, like you could say a little entity. The thought gets lodged in your mind and attracts associated thoughts and becomes a bundle of thoughts. And without awareness, you identify with the thoughts, and then you are being possessed by certain thoughts. They may arise from your personal, but very commonly they arise from the collective. In your personal life, you could develop some kind of thought that of an obsessive nature that occupies your mind, and you can't get rid of it. It could be the thought of one directed to one particular person, very, very negative thoughts. Even at the simplest level, some people you can have a melody that you can't get rid of in your mind. You can have a whole day or 2 days and you can't get rid of this thing that's in your mind. It repeats itself again and again. You can have certain assumptions about this world, like they may be totally absurd and irrational, or there may be some truth to it, but only there may be an aspect of the truth. You might think that the most absurd thoughts could be there. You might think that the extraterrestrials are already here. Well, they may be, but and every other human is actually an alien, and you just have to look at them carefully to figure out whether they are aliens or humans, and that could I'm not excluding the possibility that some aliens may be here, but I'm talking about obsessive thoughts that are probably not correct. And then it colors your subsequent perception of reality, gets totally colored by the obsessive thoughts, and it can explain everything in those terms. All the evils of the world have suddenly one explanation. Another one that's also in the collective, you can have a thought that the entire world is divided into oppressor and oppressed. Any human being either belongs to the oppressors or to the oppressed. That was an idea in communism, in economic terms, in terms of social power. They divided humanity into oppressors and oppressed. And then you can look at any human being and to me say, he's oppressed, he's an oppressor. Now, the thing is, of course, oppressors and oppressed have existed, and to some extent, in some areas, still exist. But to take one fragment of truth, because the totality of human life is much vaster than that. This is one aspect. But if you take one aspect that then occupies your mind because of lack of awareness, you are possessed by a thought. And this thought says the entire world, this is just one example, it could give many examples. The entire world is the essential identity of any human being is either they are oppressed or they are the oppressor. Now, of course, if that is the thoughts that dominate your mind, then obviously you would probably regard the oppressed as the good ones and the oppressors as the bad ones. So that simplifies life enormously. You immediately can decide who is good and who is bad. And you are probably good, presumably. Even if you are an oppressor, traditionally, you now recognize your sins, and you will atone for your sins of being an oppressor, and you side with the oppressed, and therefore you become one of the good people. Okay. So we had the same phenomenon in very extreme form. We all know about Soviet communism. We know about Chinese Mao Zedong Cultural Revolution, quite a crazy time period. We know National Socialism in Germany, the evils perpetrated by all these collective delusional systems that divided people into good and bad, entire groups, gave them an identity. I was in Cambodia a few years ago and visited the death camps of where Cambodians it's a small country, so not many people are familiar with the recent history of Cambodia, but they had an extreme communist regime under a mad dictator called Pol Pot. And in that extreme communist regime, Cambodia experienced dreadful suffering. 1/3 of the population was killed by their own government because they were the oppressors. An oppressor was anybody who could read and write, because obviously they were exploiting the peasants. Anybody who wore glasses, would immediately, like that's right, oppressor, they would be sent from the cities into the countryside to work on the fields where they didn't have enough food, and most of them starved. Total lack of humanity, because of the entire country was dominated by one absurd and obsessive thought that made it impossible for them to relate to any human being as a human being. They relate to him through the conceptualization that thought had created for them. They couldn't sense the humanity, the being of the other human anymore, the moment they had imposed a conceptual identity on them. This is an extreme example of what can happen to you when you're taken over by certain thoughts in your mind. This is not to mean that, of course, oppressive and oppressive existed and exist, but it's not the entire explanation. There are many other facts in this life. But I'm saying all this because you need to be very alert so that your mind is not taken over by certain thoughts that are not that invade your mind and color your view of reality. And there are certain irrational thoughts that are floating around in the collective at the present time. So it's very easy for you to absorb some of them and being possessed by certain thoughts. And maybe it's so irrational that it's unbelievable, but I'm not giving any examples. But you have to find it out for yourself. With awareness, you can. And be very careful with observing your mind. Be there as the witness of your mind so that you don't get taken over by certain thoughts, that your mind does not get taken over by certain thoughts. And then you cannot perceive reality anymore as it is. Everything is colored by the veil of irrational thinking. So nowadays, these things can spread very quickly and easily, these irrational things. In the past, they were confined to either one country or one area in a particular country. But nowadays, certain irrational thoughts can go through the entire world, through the technology we have, and can quickly affect millions of humans all over the world. So in the past, you had it, as I said, limited. Let's say the hunt for witches in the past are totally absurd and irrational. It's a mental disease that affected certain countries or areas in certain countries, and this mental disease then. So there were some places in Europe. There were villages and towns in Europe in the Middle Ages. During the time of collective insanity, there were almost no women left in some villages and towns at that time, because they had all been burnt or drowned because they were called as witches. Absolute insanity. So don't underestimate how insane humans can become. The only antidote that you have against that is awareness, so that your mind does not get affected by mental virus. The awareness is aware of what your mind is doing, so that your mind does not get occupied by one particular way of thinking, which is probably irrational. Anything that's one-sided, that does not see the totality of a situation, like oppressor and oppressed, if you don't see the many factors that make up a human being's identity, so be very careful with what you consume in the media. The media that brings the news to you. Be very careful with what you consume, so that you do not take on, without knowing it unquestioningly, certain ways of looking at the world. Realize that you're being how manipulative most of the mainstream media has become. So you need to watch that. If you watch it knowing how you're being manipulated, and the people themselves are being manipulated too. So they are in the grip of unconsciousness, and they want to draw others into unconsciousness. So they're not the evil ones. They just don't know any better. Can we trust our feelings? Now, often you hear people say, trust your feelings. I would suggest, however, that that's not necessarily true. Acknowledge your feelings, yes. Be there as the observing presence for your feelings, yes. Be aware of your feelings, accept that they are there. Trust, which means to take them to be the truth, or the truth for you, or using them as a guide to correct or skillful action, that may be doubtful, because it depends where these feelings arise in you. A little anecdote from my life to illustrate that. When I lived in England, in the country, in that alternative town Glastonbury for 3 years, I lived in a cottage, and once a month I would travel to London or other cities in my beloved Russian-made Lada car to do a workshop, and usually a weekend workshop called things like Transcending time or Be Here Now. Nothing much has changed, except that the average number of people I had was about 10. And since my income was not enough, I had to rent out a room upstairs in my cottage. So I had to, over these 3 years, a few people. It was a second room, which I also occasionally rent out. Anyway, the room became vacant. I advertised in the local paper. Several people came to apply, and finally chose a young woman who had just been offered a job in that town. She came, she moved in, and after the first night in her room, she came down for breakfast into the kitchen, which was a shared kitchen, and she said, "I can't stay here." I said, "What's wrong?" It's just a feeling. And I always listen to my feelings. I just can't stay. There's something not right. So I was very nervous. And I said, "Okay, that's fine." And that she found that very disconcerting, because she had expected a more conventional response, which would have been, "What? I've interviewed all these people, I've chosen you, and now what, you're doing this to me? You're not getting your rent money back that you paid in advance." But I said, "Okay, I'll give you your money back, it's fine." So she was even more confused after that. And he said, "I'll spend one more night or 2 more nights." She spent the second night, and then in the morning she said, "No, I think I'll stay. I have a different feeling now." And I said, "Oh, that's fine, that's good." And again, she was a little disconcerted, because the conventional response would have been, which I did do, "I just put another ad in the paper, and now you're telling me this?" This is how to make, the conventional responses are how to make life complicated for yourself and others. But it's normal, it's how the ego responds. And so, whenever somebody does not respond in that way, life becomes simple. But when life becomes simple, people who expect the conventional responses become confused. What? This is a weird person. And so she decided to stay, and a few weeks later, when I got to know her better, she explained to me that that first night she was in her bedroom, and she said, I found you so weird that I thought you might creep in the middle of the night and murder me. And later she said, living in the same house with you is like living in a float tank. I think she learned a lot, not so much through me explaining things to her, just by being there. Not that she didn't go through her episodes of neurotic reactivity, which is quite normal for most people, but that's fine. So feelings. Now, where did the initial feelings that she experienced, that she then believed that they were a correct guide for action? Of course, they were not, because they originated in fear, and they also originated in a misinterpretation of reality, which is so easy to do for the mind, to misinterpret another person, to misinterpret a situation. You misinterpret because you see it through the conditioning of your mind. You see it through your beliefs, your prior experiences in childhood. You see it through even other things that have conditioned your mind, maybe even scary movies about weird people who don't say much. And then just when you're having a shower, they creep in. So it is not, therefore it's not that easy often to say, where does this feeling that I have arise? Where does this feeling originate? Taking responsibility for your life is taking responsibility for how you perform your actions, what you do. And if most of your actions are means to an end, your whole life is of low quality. It lacks presence, and you're always looking out for the next moment which you think is going to be better. When it comes, is unfortunately only the present moment, which is never good enough. That's low quality life. The quality of your life, the way in which I use the term, is deeper than the conventional use of the term, although it's good to have the term at all, quality of life, because it implies that what determines the value of your life is not quantity, it's not how much you consume, how many things you own, or whatever, how many people you control in your job or your whatever. It's not quantity that determines the value of your life, it's quality. So in the conventional term, I'm glad that this term exists, it means how you enjoy, whether you enjoy, whether you can go to have quality time with another human being, which means attention,
quality activities where you're not just working all the time but doing other things. They have the quality of life of cities. Every year they have a list. I don't remember who publishes it or how they determine it, but it's an attempt to determine how pleasant it is to live or how unpleasant it is to live in a particular city. Many factors contribute to that. So that's a good thing, but the way in which I use quality goes even beyond that. Well, it is connected somehow, but it goes deeper. You can live in a city that's very low on the life quality list and lead a life of the highest quality, which means as you do what you do, you are giving it full attention, knowing that yes, I'm doing this because that I need to get there and there. You know what the end is that you want to achieve, but your primary concern is the doing, the smallest thing, and then your life is of high quality. Every action has a certain aliveness and presence to it. It's not stressed. It's not done with reluctance. It's not done with impatience. It's not done with irritation. All this, can't you see how that lowers the quality of your life, all those things? But it's so normal. But you can do the same thing. Why bring all that to the action, the irritation, the stress, the dislike, the impatience, the complaining? Why? What purpose does it? It has no real purpose, except it strengthens your false sense of self.
You need to realize most humans have this inbuilt dysfunction. They cannot acknowledge the present moment. Unconsciously, they regard the next moment, whether it's a minute from now, or an hour from now, or 2 years from now, always regard it as more important. Whenever you are impatient, trying to get somewhere, waiting for something impatiently, what's the next thing I have to do? And I have to do that. And you're pulled in all kinds of directions. What's now? Oh, now I have to do that and that and that. And there's always the pull towards the next thing. That is, I call that sometimes, you lose yourself in doing. Doing is necessary, obviously, you need to do, but to lose yourself in continuous doing is a serious dysfunction, but it's so normal that nobody realizes it. So what if you lose yourself in the doing, there's always another, and this is how stress arises. Stress is the gap, in the gap between now and later, the projected then, now and then, in that gap arises, the stress arises. So the mental projection towards future creates the stresses between where I'm here, but I want to be there. And for many humans, that is their predominant state. They are here, but they really want to be there, either there in space or time. It's amazing, and even you, awakening beings, may still, sometimes or often, find yourself in that state where you suddenly realize that the whole day you've been stressed about this, that, and that, and that. The world makes so many demands upon you. You need to deal with this and this and this, amplified by the gadgets that we now use, which is an amplification of the dysfunction through this. And you lose yourself in the doing. You become completely uncentered and basically lost. There are many, it happens even to children already at an early age these days. And many children are suffering from attention deficit disorder and so on, which means their mind is being pulled always away from the present moment. So lost in doing. Lost in doing really comes back to lost in thinking. Thinking underlies doing. So you're lost in your thoughts about the world. And then you engage in all kinds of activities propelled by thought that now I need to do this, now I need to do that. So the basic condition still for most humans on the planet, so fundamentally, yes, they are lost in doing, they lose themselves in doing, but basically it means they are lost in their mind, in the movement of thought. What now? You identify then, they identify with every thought that arises, and many thoughts are about future or the past. Not that many thoughts are about the present moment. And if they are about the present moment, then it is an interpretation of the present moment that is completely determined and colored by your past conditioning. So, very interesting to observe in oneself this tendency to deny, devalue, disregard, reduce the present moment to a means to an end. It's always a means to an end, but it's never recognized for what it is in itself. And often it is not, it is more than a means to an end. For many humans, this is a very dysfunctional way of being. For many humans, the present moment is actually regarded unconsciously as an obstacle that they need to get beyond. There's a continuous underlying unease. And what's the next thing that's going to go wrong? I know it's going to happen. Lost in the mind, lost in thought. There was an Indian teacher who described the essential human condition as lost in thought. And of course, that's how it is. This is then, this movement of thought gives you your sense of identity. Then the unease, the uneasy narrative, the problematic narrative of me and my life. I have to think about this when I wake up in the middle of the night, and I carry this heavy burden of my problematic life. For many humans, their identity is unconsciously regarded as a problem to be solved. I am a problem that I'm looking for a solution to this problem that I am. And of course, then you go to a therapist. Now, if the therapist is good, he might be able to take you beyond that. Depends. If he or she is not good, then you get more deeply entrenched, and 15 years later, you are still undergoing psychoanalysis and find ever deeper layers of complexity in your past, and there's no end to it. So, the present moment is devalued, not recognized, regarded either as a means to an end or an obstacle. That is for many humans, that is their predominant state of mental emotional state. And as I said, their identity is derived from that. So it's the error lies in identification with thought. Now, the question arises, who or what is it that identifies with thought? If I am not the story that I tell myself about who I am, if I am not ultimately that, then who or what am I? And what is it in me that identifies with the story? What is it that creates this sense of identity that exists mostly in a state of unease, or very often discontent, because it cannot acknowledge the present moment. That is the ego, by the way. That's what we call it, the egoic sense of self. There's a very simple spiritual practice to get you to the realization of who or what it is that identifies. I suggest at this moment that observe yourself internally right now to see if there's any lingering emotion in you, perhaps from earlier today or an hour ago or yesterday or the past 2 years or the past 10 years. Is there any, and can you feel, for example, is there an irritation somewhere? Is there some kind of anxiety? Is there kind of heaviness, a certain heavy mood, a despondent mood, perhaps? Is it lingering there? Is there anger, big thing, some residue of anger from what happened earlier? Is that in you? And then normally humans would say, I am angry. Or they would say, I am anxious, I'm fearful, I am in a bad mood. Now, there's already a delusion when the moment you say, I am angry, or I am anxious, that indicates already that you have identified with the emotion of anger or the emotion of sadness or the emotion of fear. You have identified, you equate I with what arises in your field of consciousness. So you say, I'm angry. It would be more correct to say, there is anger in me right now. Now, it may sound a trivial difference between saying, I am angry and there's anger in me, but there's a significant difference which goes beyond mere syntax, how you put words together. Because when you say I am, you equate I with whatever condition is there in you. This applies to emotion and it also applies to thought. Because anger is often, it's not just the anger as emotion, the anger also exists as angry thoughts, and then they reinforce each other. It's a vicious circle. When you are trapped in irritation or anger, the emotion feeds the thought, and the thought feeds more energy to the emotion. It's a vicious circle, and you don't want to get out of it. You might notice when you observe an angry person or a despondent person or an anxious person, they don't really want to be free of the anger. They don't want if you suggest it to an angry person, you can be free, you will not get a pleasant answer. And you've seen angry people who they are in the grip of anger or irritation, they cannot help it, then they shout at you and then they leave the room, and a minute later the door opens, they come back because they thought of something else to insult you with. They are in the grip of it. There is complete identification with thought and emotion. They are lost in thought, they are lost in emotion. But who or what is it that is lost? If I'm not the thoughts and the emotion, who or what am I? Okay, I just asked you to just have a look inside yourself and see what it is, if there's anything there that's jarring and doesn't feel good, but it's there. And I'm not saying try to get rid of it. No. Acknowledge the present moment. The present moment is what is, externally or internally. That's what is. But there's a huge difference now. You've already, by recognizing that there is, let's say, irritation, anger, or anxiety in you, an additional element or dimension has come in. And that dimension we could call awareness, or we could call it presence. And the moment awareness comes in, you are no longer completely identified with it. One could say, I sometimes describe it as, let's say, there's the anger, and as your awareness of the anger comes in, there's a little bit of space around it. That's the awareness. The awareness knows that there's anger. The anger may still be there. It may not immediately disappear, but the awareness knows it's there. Or whatever else it may be. The arising of awareness is spiritual awakening. The disidentification that happens when awareness arises, that is the spiritual awakening or the arising of the transcendent dimension of consciousness. Transcendent because it transcends who or what you are as a person.
To take a responsibility for, what is it that you can take responsibility for primarily? It's taking responsibility for your state of consciousness, which determines what kind of world you create. Because you are humanity. Humanity is an abstract concept, doesn't exist. Humanity is the human being. You are humanity. So for humanity to take responsibility, you need to take primarily responsibility for your state of consciousness, because only a diseased or dysfunctional state of consciousness produces a diseased and dysfunctional world out there. By world, I mean the human-made world that has been imposed on what's already there, the planet, which is potentially, of course, a paradise. The planet, pristine, unbelievable jewel, a being of great intelligence. We are not separate from it, but the being is going through a transitional process. And every transitional process is critical. It may or may not work, in which case the being will go some other way. But your state of consciousness determines what kind of world you create, what kind of action you take, and what consequences your actions have. So here, this is why my main work is to address the cause of dysfunction, which lies in the human mind. The dysfunction of the human mind, or as it is sometimes called in Zen, the sickness of the human mind. So, as I see it, and I don't think anybody who reads history can doubt it, there is a deep-seated dysfunction in humans, has been there for thousands of years. And if there's no shift in that, then the dysfunction will destroy us. It probably won't destroy the planet, because the planet has enormous resources, but it will take a while. Would take a while for the planet to recover. All you have to do then is primarily take responsibility for your state of consciousness now. Now. And this is what the entire teaching really is about. What is my state of consciousness at this moment? Am I generating disturbance? Am I generating negativity? Am I generating conflict and suffering for myself and others? Am I generating inner pollution? Am I polluting the beautiful being that I am with continuous absurd movements of thought, producing negative emotions, producing an entire entity that is illusory, that I call the me. So, to take responsibility, there needs to be just, of course, an awakening where you can say, okay, I will take responsibility now. Some people don't know that there is even the possibility of taking responsibility. That's why you are so important. Anybody who realizes it, you are the beginning of the transformed world.
When you want to strengthen the physical body, what do? You exercise. But what is that actually when you exercise? What do you do? When you exercise, one way of putting it is to say that you create difficulty for the body. You create obstacles for the body to overcome. Whatever it is, running on the treadmill, lifting weights. You're creating a difficulty for the body. Any exercise is making life difficult for the body. That's a way of looking at it. That's not a normal way of looking at it. You take the body out of its comfort zone, although there is a stage where the body, once it gets going, the body may enjoy the energy of it. But until that flows, there's a discomfort. And that's the only way the body can get stronger. If the body stays in its comfort zone, then, well, you would be lying on a sofa or in a deck chair. It's very nice, but the body doesn't change. So that's an interesting, almost an analogy for something that happens to humans, because it seems that life for everybody creates difficulties. So it's not, one would have thought, if I were God, I would make life easy for everybody. And you would then see, most likely, if you did that, most likely there would be no evolution would ever have happened, or no further evolution if you do it right now, because it's only, it seems, both on the physical level and beyond, it's only through facing difficulties, which you could also call challenges, which you could also call problems, if you like, which you could also call one damn thing after another. The strange thing is, only by encountering these challenges do we grow in consciousness and generate energy. It awakens us eventually. When I meditate, extreme fear often arises in my mind. I feel like I would be destroyed or completely disappear, so I stop meditation because of the fear. I'm so afraid to keep going on, although I intuitively know that bearing the fear would get me closer to enlightenment. How can I conquer this fear? This is, yes, of course, the fear of the person, the personalized sense of self or the ego, which can feel threatened
by the arising awareness. And once you know that, you can still meditate and allow the fear to be there. It's only when you try to run away from the fear that really it becomes a great obstacle. But if you can be with the fear, allow the fear to be there, as on a pure energy level, feel the fear, then you will find it begins to dissolve. So rather than not wanting to feel it, allow yourself to feel it. Then this is the beginning of change. If you always run away from it, then it'll linger. There's no change. There's a book called, I think, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, or something like that. But that is quite good advice, although, I mean, not applied necessarily to everything. I'm going to jump off now. But to allow yourself to feel whatever feeling comes is part of the present, the isness of the present moment. So if the fear arises, but then you also realize what is the fear created by a thought? You will know that. Or is the fear arising just by itself in a particular situation when you become still? Do you have a fear of silence? Do you feel uncomfortable when you go into a room and there's no noise in it? Some people do feel. Some people are uncomfortable in nature. It's not noisy enough. So, see, it may be that the fear arises when you become still, you meditate. Then it's not necessarily associated with a thought, but with that arising of awareness. And instead of stopping your meditation, just what happens if I just carry on and make the fear into a meditation, meditate on the fear. So if you do meditate, nothing really can disturb you. The good meditator incorporates whatever arises in the present moment into the meditation, including the most irritating noise that suddenly starts up outside. And the mind says, I can't meditate now. I need stillness. And then you realize, no, perhaps this is part of the meditation. And how does it become part of the meditation? By allowing the isness of this moment, which is that by just letting go of resistance, allow whatever it is to be. And if it comes from within, fear, anxiety, you allow that to be. But you have to be careful that it doesn't become a thought, because the moment you are drawn back into thinking, that's the end of your meditation. You can allow a thought to be there, but in order to allow a thought to be there, that implies that there is some awareness there behind the thought, so you are still there. If so, to be able, it's a wonderful thing. You allow the thought to be there. It's very different from being drawn into the thought and following it where it wants to take you. Of course, that's the end of your meditation or your mindfulness or whatever you want to call it. I don't use mindfulness, as you know, because it's not about a full mind. That's why I avoid the word mindfulness. But mindfulness is a lovely thing. It's really presence. So you can follow a thought. It grabs you. It grabs all your attention and pulls you along. That's one way. Or you can realize there's a thought arising about what my ex-spouse did 5 years ago to me while I'm meditating. And you can allow the thought to arise and be aware. And if you do that instead of being pulled into it, then you will find that it arises and it subsides. So then it becomes very much like the sky. Let's say you have a blue sky and clouds occasionally come. So the clouds are the thoughts that arise in the mind. the blue sky, the vastness of that space is your awareness. So clouds are not a problem if within the larger context of the aware presence. They come and go. And there might be thoughts that say ridiculous things. There might be a thought about, I'd like to eat apple pie now. I really need to eat apple pie. The mind asks the most absurd things to interrupt your meditation. Then you imagine an apple pie you're eating. And then you know there's the thought of apple pie. You allow that to be. You don't get drawn into the apple pie thought, or even suddenly you have to get up and run to the fridge to see if there's an apple pie still in there. So the thought arises, you are the sky, that's the awareness, and the thought is what comes into the awareness. Now, if more and more thoughts come, or if you follow one of the cloud thoughts that drift into the space of awareness, one of the cloud thoughts, and you suddenly go, it grabs hold of you and you follow it. Then the cloud gets bigger. Then it attracts other clouds that correspond to it. They suddenly come from out of nowhere. And then you are in a big cloud. You're still sitting there trying to meditate, but you're really in a big cloud of thought. And before you know it, the entire sky is cloudy, totally overcast. Now, of course, there's still some light shining through the clouds, but you no longer know where that comes from. There's some light, of course, consciousness. Thought cannot exist without consciousness. Thought is a manifestation of consciousness. But, so there's the consciousness that is behind the thoughts, but you don't no longer know that consciousness directly, only through the filter of thoughts, in the same way that you don't know the sunlight anymore except through the filter of the clouds. You know that you get defensive. The question is, do you know in the moment of getting defensive that you're defensive, or do you know it afterwards? You can look into that. I'm rarely content or grateful. That's interesting. That's very good self-observation too. I'm not content at this moment. I'm not content. My thinking is so negative. Another good piece of knowledge. My thinking is negative at this moment. What are the thoughts that are going through my head? So if you apply the awareness that is already there hiding behind all these things, if you apply the awareness to the present moment when these things arise, defensiveness, what is low self-esteem? It's something that you tell yourself about yourself in your mind, is certain repetitive thoughts that the voice in the head tells you. This is low self-esteem. There might be certain emotions that go with it, emotions that are, but really, basis for low self-esteem is something you tell yourself about your low worth. It's thoughts. Now, the questioner already knows that she has low self-esteem, and if she can know that she has low self-esteem in the moment of the low self-esteem arising as thoughts, she can recognize them as thoughts and not necessarily true thoughts arising, repetitive thoughts, that conditioned thoughts. Perhaps this low self-esteem might have started in childhood. It often happens to people whose parents are very critical, or parents tell them, you're never good enough. This can be one reason. So it might have started there. It's a conditioned way of thinking, conditioned thoughts. Now, the awareness that's already there in the questioner would need to be there in the moment of those things arising. And then you can see when these thoughts arise, you recognize them as thoughts that are arising, and you're no longer completely trapped in what these thoughts are saying. In other words, to use an analogy that we used not long ago, your sense of being is not in the thought anymore, it's in the awareness of the thought. In other words, if you look at the sky, the vast sky, daytime, this time, let's look at the daytime sky, the vastness of that, the huge expansiveness of the sky is awareness in this analogy, and clouds that come are thoughts. So when the clouds come, why can I never do anything right? Why are other people more successful than me? Or I'm no good at this. When these thoughts come, instead of being drawn into those clouds, and then the clouds get bigger and bigger, you remain the sky and allow the clouds to pass and then to pass away. And that means you begin to you're no longer feeding conditioned thinking, and you are separating who you are. You're taking your identity out of thinking. Thinking for a while has still a momentum. Old patterns will come again and again, but you're no longer renewing them. You're no longer feeding them by, how do you feed them? By identifying with every thought that comes. There's a self in it. So you separate yourself. You are the awareness behind the thought. Same applies to any kind of negative thinking. You recognize it as automatic. It arises and it's a thought. So, but you are the awareness that knows that this is a negative thought pattern. And if that can grow, because it's already there to some extent, if that grows, which means deepens, then those conditioned patterns will diminish. They get transmuted. So, another one point here mentioned, I get defensive easily. Defensive can happens very, very quickly in human interactions. The defensiveness can come up so quickly, it's an automatic pattern. And you may only know it afterwards. Oh, that was defensiveness again. And defensiveness is, of course, these are all ego, ways of the ego to protect itself, ego being the mind-made self. Defensiveness will just come up with any lie just to keep its ego identity intact. So it'll come up with anything just to keep, it's automatic. So you can, of course, in Miracles has a lovely saying, which is, whenever you become defensive about anything, know that you have identified with an illusion. You have identified yourself with an illusion. That's interesting. Is that true? Let's say you say that the distance from here to the moon is 300, I think in kilometers it's like 350,000 or so kilometers, and that the light takes just over 1 second to travel from the moon to the Earth. And you know that for a fact. Well, I know that. I haven't verified it myself, but it seems to be true. And somebody else says, no, that's completely untrue. It actually takes 1 minute. It does. Now, this is just a difference of opinion or viewpoint. And of course, you know very well that the other person is wrong. Now, if you say, no, that's not right, is that defensiveness? Well, it depends how you say it. The question is, are you identified with your mind, which has this position, which happens to be true, but are you identified with that mental position? In other words, do you derive your sense of self from thought? If you're identified with, you will get angry and defensive about the other person who is so completely wrong. And you might say things like, well, if you know that person well, you always doubt me. Why do you always doubt me? You never believe what I say, do you? That's called defensiveness, and that's the ego trying to protect itself. And then the Course in Miracles thing applies Know that when you become defensive about anything, know that you've identified with yourself with an illusion. The illusion is not that it takes 1 second for the light from the moon to travel to the earth. That's not what the illusion is. The illusion is that you identified with a thought, with a mind pattern. And so you are strengthening an illusory identity by identifying, by strengthening the mental position of me, my mental position. That's unconscious. So this is how just a difference of opinion can degenerate into huge conflict, just a small difference of opinion, because the ego becomes defensive. So that requires alertness on your part, so that you know when it arises. So whenever you become defensive, so without ego, the same conversation would go, no, it takes 1 minute, I know that for a fact. The other person says, no, it takes 1 second, the other says it takes a minute. Well, no, you're wrong, it takes 1 second. Okay, well, we'll leave it at that then. I think it's a second and you think it's a minute. End of the story. That would be without defensiveness or ego. Okay? And then you can go on where everybody goes on the internet. And that would definitely solve it. And in extreme forms of egoic unconsciousness, you will say, what it says in Wikipedia is wrong. It's wrong. They didn't get it right. That may bring me to another question. Oh, just to end on this question, the key is your awareness, so that deepens, then all those patterns that you mention will weaken. And there's already a considerable amount of awareness in this person, the questioner. The awareness, of course, isn't the person, but it's deeper than the person. The thing is to apply the awareness to the present moment when things arise, not in some abstract way, I am a defensive person. Will I ever become a person who is not negative? I can't get rid of my negative patterns. I'm so negative. So it doesn't matter. This moment is what matters. So just apply your awareness to this moment. You can't change things into mental constructs. How can I change myself? I don't want to be that kind of a person anymore. Forget it. To this moment. This is where you apply presence. As I sometimes call it, I haven't used that expression in a while, the sword of presence that cuts through time, and you go, psh, and then you apply it to this.
Many people are uncomfortable with themselves. They dislike who they are. Perhaps they dislike their body, how they look. Perhaps they dislike who they are as a person, don't feel they are good enough, or are self-critical a lot. Many people live with a negative self-image, which of course all consists of certain types of mind activity, and that's not pleasant. And it may be for some of those people, once they realize that they live with a mind pattern that continually criticizes them and says negative things about them, they begin to realize that it's a mind pattern. This self-hatred is a mind pattern, and that it's harmful, it's not pleasant, and they can go beyond it and begin to replace it with more negative thoughts more positive thoughts about themselves. And having positive thoughts about yourself, that kind of thing would perhaps usually be called beginning to love yourself,
to feel good about yourself. But it's not easy, that shift from feeling bad about yourself to feeling good about yourself. Sometimes it requires a lot of convincing. I would regard loving yourself as perhaps an intermediate stage in one's awakening. But the essence of the awakened consciousness is that you go beyond having a particular idea in your mind that represents yourself, as a mental self-image that you relate to. Because basically it's ego, a mental self-image of who you think, this is what I am, this is who I am. If you want to learn about not having a mental self-image, watch your dog or your cat. They don't have an opinion about who they are. They just are who they are. So that removes an enormous amount of problems from their lives. Of course, they don't have the mind activity that creates a self-image in their head. They are pre-mind, and therefore their life is far less problematic than human life. You can see how wonderful it is not to have a self-image. You can look at an ugly dog or an ugly cat. They don't have a problem with that. Even an overweight dog or cat, they're okay. No self-image. So there's no need to demand that external conditions should be perfect so that you can become still. In fact, it's sometimes the case that it's precisely when external conditions are seemingly unhelpful that can sometimes be a greater opportunity to find that true stillness. And especially that is the case when external circumstances have the appearance of actually being a hindrance, something disturbing, something happening that upsets the status quo in your life. And those are great opportunities, because then your motivation for going deeper as you suffer when things happen in your external life that, quote, unquote, should not be happening, then you begin to suffer. And as you suffer, the motivation eventually arises of going deeper, of finding the place where there is no suffering. And you could still suffer a little bit on the external level of your life. So sooner or later we find in our life that life does things to us, seemingly putting obstacles in our path, seemingly having bad intentions towards us. We experience diminishment in some form. Of course, the ego says, or the egoic self says, that's terrible. I don't want any diminishment. Diminishment meaning loss of something that had become part of your sense of self. It could be loss of possessions, could be loss of a relationship, loss of a loved one, loss of a healthy body, diminishment of physical health, loss of your persona, of what other people think of you. One day they tell you that you're the greatest, and the next day they tell you you're awful. Diminishment of whatever kind is abhorrent to the egoic self. There's a beautiful saying, I believe it comes originally, I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter where it comes out of consciousness, so it doesn't really matter. But I believe it comes originally out of Sufism, and that is, when the ego weeps for what it has lost, the spirit rejoices for what it has found. And those people who, and there's no human, by the way, who does not experience this in life several times, sooner or later, the next one comes. Some people experience it even very early in life. Some children have experienced loss of a parent, or of both parents. So diminishment comes sooner or later. How do you meet it? Recognize it when it comes, not as a monster or the work of some malevolent deity or demon that wants to sabotage your life, but as an opportunity also. Now, you may not be able to be grateful for it in the moment of it happening. That would be perhaps too much to ask. But you will find that at later, a year may pass, 2 years depending on what it is, suddenly realize that it has taken you deeper into the essence of who you are, because something was removed from you that you thought you were, but it was a fiction ultimately. You had identified with something that ultimately is not who you are, it's a temporary thing. Possessions, not status, great physically strong body, good looks. A relationship. And then retrospectively, very often you are able to be grateful for the loss, for the diminishment, because it drove you deeper. It brought out the essence of who you are beyond any form. Now, it does not do that to all humans. It's for everybody. Diminishment is only a potential deepening. The possibility is there. Many, many humans are not able to use it because nobody has told them. The knowledge, this kind of spiritual knowledge, is still very limited. It is not part of mainstream culture. People are dying every day without having any true assistance. People who are approaching death, who are getting old, our mainstream culture still knows nothing. It's just, let's prolong life for as long as possible, even if it's totally pointless and it creates a lot of suffering. Let's just, because we don't know what to do with death. That's one of the reasons why the foundation will hopefully be able to reach people to use the opportunity of this greatest diminishment, which is death, the greatest, when as you approach death, an enormous opportunity for spiritual awakening, realization. But many humans, of course, miss the opportunity of that diminishment, and with the result that the ego becomes even more hardened through it, or in the words of Brother David, shriveled up to an even harder, lifeless thing. Then either you carry continuous anger or resentment or despondency for years, which becomes part of your egoic identity, and the ego loves any kind of identity. If it's a miserable one, doesn't matter, I'll have it. Just give me a strong identity. I take miserable any time over being nobody. So the opportunity of diminishment is missed. Often you see when people, they're wealthy people, and suddenly something happens, they lose their money, and then they jump out of the window because their entire sense of self was associated with their possessions. There are people who lose their reputation. You remember, of course, the case of Mr. Madoff a few years ago, who had this fraudulent schemes, and people lost millions or billions of people who were investing with him on Wall Street. They lost, it was a pyramid, it was a Ponzi scheme, I think is the word. So he was deceiving all these people, and they lost all their money, and he had accumulated billions, and then finally it all collapsed. Now he's in prison, and his sons couldn't take it. One of his sons, apparently the sons didn't know what was going on. I don't know if that's true, but they were also working in his firm, in his company. I believe one died of cancer soon after, and the other committed suicide. Would have been a great opportunity if only somebody had told them, you've lost your money, you've lost your reputation. This is a great opportunity. Find yourself. Here, the opening is there. But it's just lack of information. Nobody told them. I hadn't actually thought of this until this moment, because we want to bring the teaching to places where it otherwise would not go or would not reach. And I just thought of Wall Street. We will donate books and CDs to Wall Street. So we'll have to call Goldman Sachs tomorrow, see if they agree. Now, they won't be very interested perhaps at the moment, but they may become interested in the future. Just wait. So you have already, I believe, everybody here has already experienced some forms of diminishment, to use that word, through the physical form, the psychological me entity. And for many, the reason why you're here is because you've gone through that, and it has deepened you. Even the collapse of a relationship. You don't have to be married, but you have a relationship, doesn't go well, it ends. It's a little death, it can be painful, it leaves a little hole in you. It takes it seemingly rips something out of you, and for quite a while you feel it. It's not pleasant. But there too is an opportunity. So when the ego weeps for what it has lost, oh dear, so terrible, I'll tell you what happened. And I'll tell myself what happened. Even if nobody's listening, it'll go through your head. Oh my God. I can't take any more of this. I just can't take it. It's just too much. What's the point of it all? Just completely false. It's good to act out the ego sometimes, because then you can actually see it. It's like a reflection in the mirror, because it's funny, because you remember everybody knows, familiar with that in some way, and that's why it becomes funny. I'm learning from Marianne yesterday, because she has other ways of acting out the ego. It's a little bit more feminine, but I can try that too. It may look a little weird when I do it, though. But there's a lot in it that doesn't really need to be explained in words. Just this simple gesture implies a self-image, to look at yourself through a self-image. Look at me.
Be grateful for whatever your experience of this moment is. And if you cannot be grateful, at least allow it to be, because it already is. You might as well. Now, if you did this little thing, it sounds very little, and it is very little, allowing your experience of this moment to be the way it is, just this little thing would remove, it's hard to put it in percentage terms, let's say 95% of the suffering from your life. I don't know about the rest, the 5%, we'll get to that sometime. That would already remove a gigantic chunk of unhappiness in whatever form. Unhappiness is the most generic term one could use. The Buddha called it suffering. And so for the next 6 months, then that obviously is one of the practices. Not to internally resist your experience of this moment. Now, of course, many times, possibly you'll forget that. And that's fine. The moment you realize that you forgot it, it's there again, and then you can accept the experience of this moment as the unhappiness that is arising in you because you forgot to accept your experience of this moment, and so you feel this unhappiness arising in you, and you say, where does that come from? Oh, I forgot to accept my experience of this moment. And then you accept the unhappiness, and the weird thing with unhappiness is when you completely accept the unhappiness, it cannot survive very long. It cannot actually coexist with acceptance. So the weird thing then arises that you say something like, okay, I'm unhappy, that's okay, I don't mind being unhappy. And then the unhappiness goes, what's going on? That's not supposed to happen. The unhappiness cannot survive for very long with the acceptance, even the acceptance of unhappiness, not indulging in unhappiness, but the acceptance. Now, the acceptance of unhappiness, it presupposes that there's an awareness there that knows that you're unhappy. Now, that might sound like something very natural, but it isn't, because the most unhappy people, and there are still millions, and of course they have reasons for being unhappy, yes. And it's not necessarily the people who you'd think would have the most powerful reasons for being unhappy. It's often those who you would think, well, there are many millions who have it worse than they, but these are more unhappy than those. It's often the case. So the unhappiness is something that when it's recognized as unhappiness and accepted, something happens to it. It begins to dissolve. But the really unhappy people are so identified with the unhappiness, which is a combination of certain recurring thoughts in your head, a certain narrative that is not pleasant, whether it is about my life, whether the narrative says my life, oh, dreadful thing, my life, oh, why did it all go so wrong, and now that's it, it's nothing I can do, or whether the narrative is about somebody else. You know what he did, what she said and did, and the narrative may be about something that hasn't happened yet, and it goes on and on, or something that happened in the distant past, or not so distant past. So there's a narrative, and then there are emotions that are a reflection of the narrative. The narrative is thoughts, certain types of thoughts, certain thoughts that have a certain frequency. And then that awakens the emotional frequency, because the body thinks the narrative in your mind is reality, that is the reality that you're experiencing. So the body reacts with an emotion. Simple example, at night you can't sleep because you're extremely worried about what's going to happen to you, or somebody close to you, or even the world. And it all sounds very critical. There's a crisis in your head. Not outside. Outside your head there's a pillow, and there's a blanket, or even something big and fluffy and soft, down, duvet, and there's no unhappiness there. And if you look around the bedroom also, where's the unhappiness? The plant is okay, it's not unhappy. No, it's all happening in here. And then the body says that is the critical reality that you inhabit. There is a crisis in your life. The body doesn't know the difference between what's actually happening and what's happening in your head. What's happening in your head is taken to be the absolute reality. And then you experience the emotion that goes with that kind of narrative. And so there's no awareness. And when you're trapped in that, you don't even really know that you are unhappy, because you are the unhappiness. The unhappiness has become your identity. So when you become the unhappiness, you don't even know that you're, or suffer, let's use the Buddhist term suffering. when you are in this deep suffering, you don't even know you're suffering, because the suffering is a gigantic, huge chunk part of your sense of self. You are a suffering entity. And as all therapists know, that once the patient or the client, or whatever they call the people that come to them according to their school, they reach a point where there's a possibility of going beyond the deep-seated patterns, unconscious patterns. And then there's a huge resistance very often, because the person is afraid of losing a very important piece of their identity, and sometimes it's the most important part of their identity. If they have lived with an unhappy sense of self for years and perhaps even decades, they don't want to let go. And again, they don't know that consciously. They never say, I do not want to let go. But if they could say that, then that means there's already some awareness. So lack of awareness, lack of presence, that is the unawakened state that still, unfortunately, millions of humans are trapped in that. But the moment you know, you recognize your inner state, that means there is an awareness, which there is another dimension of consciousness that has emerged in you, through you. A deeper dimension of consciousness that is not the conditioned thinking. So we can call it awareness, we can call it presence, you can call it the unconditioned consciousness. And then the beginning of freedom, or the possibility of freedom arises. And it's from there that you recognize your inner states as they arise. From there that you recognize your unhappiness. You can say, oh, you can feel the unhappiness. But the moment you become aware of suffering or unhappiness in you, you're no longer feeding it with your thoughts. As long as you're not aware, you're feeding it as a vicious circle. You're feeding it with your thoughts, with your narrative, and you're trapped in the vicious circle. Your narrative creates more unhappiness. The unhappiness creates more thought, and you're trapped in that. So for the next 6 months, and hopefully beyond, because it's a much more pleasant way to live, you make it your practice to be aware of your inner states, and meaning no matter what situation arises in your life, whether it's little things, big things, difficult situations, difficult people, challenges, problems, because the next 6 months are not going to be free of challenges and problems. So whatever it is, realize that the primary factor in any situation is your inner state, because that determines how you respond. So no matter what it is, your primary responsibility is to be aware of what goes on inside you. And that means whatever arises in your life is actually to be used in your practice, so that you do not become dependent on what's going on externally in your life. So your inner state gradually is no longer determined, perhaps still a little bit, yes, but not completely determined by outer events, people, situations, and so on. Inner freedom arises. That's awakening.
How do I strike a healthy balance between simply accepting life as it unfolds and actively working towards and striving towards goals, destinations, aspirations? Well, accepting life as it unfolds, of course, is the foundation for conscious and sane living, accepting whatever unfolds in the present moment. There is nothing else. That's the foundation. Does that mean you cannot have goals. You cannot have aspirations, wanting to achieve this, do that. It's perfectly compatible with accepting what is arising in this moment. One difference between the unconscious state, which denies this moment and wants to make it into a means to an end all the time, the difference then is, what is the motivation for your doing? If you deny this moment, can never embrace it, honor it, appreciate it, then the motivation for your action is basically dissatisfaction with what is. And the action is looked towards as a possible way of overcoming the discontent and the dissatisfaction that you feel with the present moment. And that's a very normal pattern, and that's for many, many people, that is what motivates them. They don't feel good enough, they feel there's something fundamental missing in their lives, they don't feel recognized, they don't feel loved, whatever, and so they try to find something, achieve something that will bring them that which they feel is missing. They don't realize that that is not going to work. You need to start with the foundation for your life, which is this moment, and go deeply into that and become okay with it, friendly with it, realize it's the only thing there ever is, just this moment, nothing ever exists that's not this moment. So you might as well become friendly with it and appreciate it and look around and see how actually it's okay, this moment is actually okay. And if it's not okay, you can still say, well, that's what is right now. If something goes wrong, that's what is. And then things will come in that you want to do. Suddenly an idea comes, or you need to do something to make a living. And then out of that state of becoming one with the isness of the present moment, something arises and wants to take form in the world that perhaps you want to create. And then you create it out of the joy of doing instead of out of a feeling of lack, that you need something to make you complete or happy. So the motivation changes from neediness and discontent to joyful doing. It's not stressed anymore. When stress is a sign that you've lost the present moment. The next moment has become more important than life itself.
I'm surprised there's nothing on Google about Eckhart and free will, but maybe I haven't said anything about it. So here we go. As you know, it's an eternal, ancient philosophical question, and there's never been a definitive answer that everybody would agree with in that sense. So is there free will? You mentioned everybody's doing their best because nobody can act beyond their level of consciousness, etc., for example. Okay, let's start from on one level. And then we go on to the next level. On the level of egoic unconsciousness, where you are a conditioned entity, your mental, emotional makeup is totally conditioned by the past, and you are completely identified with the conditioning of your mind, and in that state, that spiritually speaking is the unconscious state, it is obvious that in that state there is no freedom at all, because you are forced to act out the unconscious conditioning of your mind with which you are completely identified. So I think most people would probably agree, if you understand that on that level, there is no possibility of freedom. Your actions are determined by your conditioned mind. You are forced to act as you do because there is no choice, because choice would imply some awareness. So on that level, there's certainly no freedom. Then awareness comes in. The human being begins to awaken. Then it appears, I'm not saying it is the case, it appears that then freedom begins to be a possibility, because you can choose to step out of the conditioning of your mind. You can recognize a conditioned thought, and you're no longer compelled to act it out because there is an awareness there. You can choose a certain course of action, not from the conditioning of your mind, but from the presence. So you can act, and you have much more freedom that before you could not have. Freedom comes with awareness. So it's then relative to the unconscious state, there is now freedom to act. But if you look more deeply, even there on that level, you are connected with the totality of consciousness. You're only an expression of the totality of consciousness. You are not really a separate entity. You are who said it? You are, was it Alan Watts who said you in the same way that the wave is something that the ocean is doing, you are something that the whole universe is doing in the same way. So the wave is something the ocean is doing, you are something that the universe is doing. So although it appears from a certain relative to the previous state of unconsciousness, there is freedom, and relative to that there is freedom. But then if you look more deeply into that, you realize that even there, one cannot say that you are choosing this. You are an expression of consciousness, and consciousness, one could say, is choosing, and you think you are doing it. Sometimes people ask me, can you choose to be present? And from one perspective, you can choose to be present. From another perspective, one could say that the presence chooses you. It chooses to become present through you. Depends how you look at it. So in ultimate terms, or in relative terms, there is freedom relative to the unconscious state when you become more conscious. But even there, it's only relative to the unconscious state. Even there is not absolute freedom, because you do not exist as an independent entity. You are part of the web of interconnectedness that is the whole universe. So in that sense, there is no freedom of choice of the individual, because ultimately there is no individual.
Adversity can strengthen the ego, or it can gradually, or in some cases suddenly, dissolve the ego, or at least diminish it. So it can go either way. And I must agree with you. I don't know whether you literally said it. Perhaps still in the majority of cases, it strengthens the ego, because nobody knows, people don't know the opportunity that every adversity represents. So why does it happen? How does it strengthen the ego? You can see it sometimes with people who are sick, or people who are disabled. Let's say I've met disabled people with physical disabilities, for example, and in some cases they are really angry with the world and bitter, because look at what happened to me. They say, why do I can't move anymore? I've been afflicted with this. What have I done to deserve this? And these are questions that are
justifiable questions. The question, what have I done to deserve? Why has the world, or whatever they say, God, the world, the universe, or whoever, they've done this to me? Why? And then they become bitter and angry, and the ego becomes more and more rigid and hardened, and so that is one way it could go. And then I have met people with disabilities who, through their disability, at some point, whether through a spiritual teaching, and in some cases never come into contact with any spiritual teaching, it just happened that at some moment they realized intuitively that all the suffering was generated through resistance, and then the resistance to the isness of their life, this moment, they were able to let go because perhaps the suffering was getting too much. Something happened, something clicked inside, or even if it didn't happen completely, they were able to have moments of inner peace. An inner peace that is not caused by an external condition, an inner peace that seems to be in contradiction to an external condition, so that they would say, how could a person who is suffering this feel so peaceful? And so also that applies to people who are approaching the end of their lifespan because they have some illness and they have been to the doctor, and the doctor says you have 6 months or 1 year, and suddenly something in them opens up, and all that remains is that the person already dies. There's no more future. And all that remains is the present moment and the aware space. So I've had the privilege of working with, when I was still seeing individuals, with 2 or 3 people to whom that happened. And they became luminous beings in the last few weeks or months of their lives, and became just, I couldn't see that there was any person left. There was only a space of conscious presence left. Just wonderful, as if they had just come into this world. So they came, and then they came to me, and then still asking questions, very profound questions, wanting to understand what happened, and it's beautiful. So this can happen. It can happen collectively to people who go through warfare and in countries, or become refugees. They lose everything. And again, it can go either way. Whenever there's any great loss in your life, that again, an opportunity opens up. If you resist, and you resist, the resistance origin. The origin of the resistance is a narrative that forms in your mind that says something about the situation and about your life and about other people. So the narrative forms in your mind, and the narrative is an unhappy one, and then there's continuous resistance, a non-alignment with the isness of the present moment. Now one could ask, well, how could somebody who's lost their home, perhaps even lost loved ones, and then they don't know where to go, how could this person be in a state of alignment with the present moment? Isn't that, how can somebody accept the unacceptable, accept that which in conventional terms would be regarded as unacceptable? How is that possible? But that's precisely it. If you can accept the unacceptable, that is the opening, and then you realize the unacceptable is actually not unacceptable, it is acceptable. And I was homeless for a certain period in my life, with not knowing what to live on the next day or the next week. And I had already gone into the state of acceptance, so it was a very pleasant experience, but potentially would have been extremely unpleasant. So not having a home was for me already something that was not experienced as something bad. But I knew I had to take some action eventually to get a home. And so gradually something happened. I don't want to talk too much about that. I also mentioned in the New Earth, I believe, when I was at university, there was the Stephen Hawking, the physicist who was confined to a wheelchair, passed away a couple of years ago. And it was, he wasn't famous at that time, only famous locally in the university. We would always be in the same dining room having lunch, but not the same table. I never met him, wasn't introduced, but observed him many times sitting at a neighboring table. The one moment when I held open the door for him, he was coming through in his wheelchair, and I looked into his eyes and I could see there was no unhappiness. When you're in nature, you may be looking at something, whatever it may be, but then you can also take in the totality of where you are, whatever it may be, your surroundings, trees, mountains, the ocean, or just simple, a grassy surface, bushes. Take in the totality and then bring in other sense perceptions too. But that requires alertness so that you don't drift back into mental concepts. Stay alert, then you become aware not just of the visual aspect of being there. You become aware of the sounds. There may be sounds, natural sounds, or there may be sounds that are not natural, that are interfering, but that's fine. There may be natural sounds, a breeze you can hear, the wind, the leaves are moving in the wind, or the certain birds, who knows, all natural sounds. Then there's also the air. You can feel the air, perhaps there's a very slight movement of air, you can feel it on your skin. And then there's a sense of, you smell, there's a certain sense arise as you become aware of your sense of smell. Maybe you can smell the moisture in the ground or whatever. Be there with all your senses. All senses. You can also, for a few moments, close your eyes so that you can more focus on the other senses that tend to be neglected for many people. So you just take in you smell the air. You feel the slight breeze on your skin. Sounds. It's a beautiful experience, yeah, and you don't need to look for always the spectacular in nature. Sometimes nature can be very spectacular, but a lot of the time it's just ordinary things. Yes, sometimes you have a beautiful, incredible flower or gigantic sequoia tree or whatever, incredible things. And many other times there's just normal nature there, nothing that says, pay attention to me. So you have to find, if you're alert enough, you will see the concealed in the ordinary spectacle of nature, there is an extraordinary aliveness and beingness and presence. So you don't always look for the great thing. Just to be aware of many things that one would habitually overlook in a normal state of consciousness. There's a bush there, there's a grass here, it's been cut. Nothing special. But if you really become alert, then you see everything is intensely alive. There's a consciousness there. It may not be self-conscious, not conscious of itself. There is a consciousness that has manifested as the tree, the flower, the grass, the bush. There's a consciousness that has manifested in that form. A different vibrational frequency, one could say, to your consciousness. But it's not your consciousness. There's only one universal consciousness manifesting in countless life forms. So you begin to recognize, but only because you know yourself as consciousness. Your mind has become still enough for you to know yourself as consciousness. You sense the consciousness that is inseparable from who you are, that is the essence of who you are, that is who you are. And then you can sense the consciousness in other life forms.
Let's just take a moment and become aware of the present moment. Vitally important in any endeavor that you undertake, no matter what it is not to lose your connectedness with the present moment. So before you start a new enterprise, a new activity, always good to take a moment for awareness. Basically, that's what it is. Sometimes people ask, well, what is the present moment? How do you where is it? What does it even mean to become aware of the present moment? And the first thing, of course, is that you become aware of whatever surrounds you. That's the entry point into the present moment, a very easy entry point into a present moment awareness. Some people may call it mindfulness, is to become more aware of whatever surrounds you here and now. Sense perceptions, just be with what is. Give it attention, some attention. The room you're sitting in. Maybe there's a window, you can look out of the window. You can see trees behind me, I can't see them, I know they're there. You enter the present moment by becoming more aware of sense perceptions, auditory, visual, and perhaps others. And of course, what that does, you might notice, is there's less mental noise. The voice in the head that speaks and speaks, that talks to you, that you have a dialogue with, a monologue that comments and interprets and takes positions, mental positions, that identifies with, likes, dislikes, yes, no, never stops talking. That's the mind, the voice in the head that most people are completely identified with, and that means they're not present. So the first step is take some attention away from that by simply becoming aware of sense perceptions. And if you can look at something natural, that's even better, because a natural thing
a tree, a flower, a plant, the sky, a natural thing lends itself to present moment awareness more than a man-made, a human-made thing. So anything natural that you can look at for a moment, focus on, and give it attention, acknowledge it. You don't need to think about it. So it's just become aware of the present moment through sensory perception. And already, if you can do that, if perhaps a few minutes before you were very much immersed in the problem-making mind, it wasn't actually solving any problem, because this continuous mind activity actually creates more problem than it solves. If it's not focused, it's unconscious. So already, suddenly, there's a certain amount of peace that descends upon the world, your world. It becomes a bit more peaceful. You become aware of the aliveness of things. The sense of being an outsider is also something that I have had throughout my life. And the sense of not belonging here, watching my parents being engaged in continuous conflict, not because they were bad people, they did what they did, and they loved me as best they could, and they did what they did as a reflection of their state of consciousness at that time, which was a normal state of consciousness, egoic state of consciousness. But I sometimes felt, how did I get here? Somehow, there must have been a mistake. It's often outsiders, feeling an outsider on the one hand seems a terrible limitation, that you can't participate as much. On the other hand, it's a great opportunity, because some of the most creative people in the world have been outsiders. They did not fit in. Misfits is the English word. Misfits. Now, the friendships I had when I was a child, and that's another interesting thing. I had a friend. One of my friends was severely physically disabled, and nobody else wanted to be friends with him because of that, and he was probably my closest friend. And the other one was so weird that nobody wanted to talk to him. But he became my friend, so they were outsiders too. And but the interesting fact here, as you know, I couldn't believe it when they told me that there are people here from 70 countries. It seems almost unbelievable, but it's true. I saw the list. 70 countries. And you may find, I'm sure you will find, quite often, you can feel a bond, or you have more in common with many of the people who are here than you have with your own people in your own country at home who are not going through any spiritual awakening, who are still totally conditioned, 100% conditioned by their culture. So you feel a connectedness here with other humans that transcends culture and conditioning and all this silly political stuff. It transcends that. And this is a wonderful thing. So to some extent, you can now connect with people even if you don't always see them physically, you might live, I don't know whether you live in a big city or a small village.
A small city.
Small city.
Small city, yeah.
Yeah. What city?
Innsbruck in Austria.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Nice, very nice. I don't know how many people in Innsbruck are.
120,000.
And how many of those are awakening? We don't know. We don't know, of course. But this helps, I believe, being here and feeling you are not alone. You are connected. So this should be a help. For the rest, you just have to accept that this is how it is. And no matter how hard you try to fit in on the normal level, you probably won't, nor do you have to. So I know there are many people here who feel that, and be happy with it.
Yeah.
But don't make it into some kind of superiority, because the ego can always creep in. Before you know it, there's always a back door, and then the ego is back in. So you could go from feeling bad about being an outsider to suddenly feeling, okay, I'm an outsider because I'm superior. And then, so we have to be careful, don't go there. So that's just how it is. If you probably would not be here if you had not been felt like an outsider for many years.
Yeah.
So it worked. The transcendence of thinking means the transcendence of the egoic mind. It means that you are able to spend part of your time relatively free of compulsive thinking, certainly free of self-serving thinking and destructive thinking that continuously creates unhappiness for yourself and the people around you. How many people live the compulsive narrative in your mind that for many people is very negative, constantly critical, constantly complaining, never at ease with what is. There's always something wrong, fault-finding, because the ego grows through constant opposition, constant antagonism, never at ease, always looking for the next thing to complain about. And it strengthens the egoic self. The more you complain, offended is a new version these days. It's very popular on the internet. I'm very, very offended. Outrageous. How dare you? There are thousands or hundreds of thousands who go on every day, they look on their screen waiting for the next thing to be offended by. And the ego loves it. And for many of them, it's the only way they can inflate their ego, by sitting on the screen and sending out tweets. The transcendence of thinking is not any kind of regressive movement. We are not regressing to the state of somebody whose mind is relatively undeveloped and who does not have a problem with egoic thinking because there's very little going on in their minds. What used to be called, before it became politically incorrect, idiot or fool. The fool was, they were always, you could see happy fools. They don't, there's not enough thinking to make them unhappy, so they are below egoic thinking. In medieval times, every village had at least one village idiot or fool, and normal was accepted, essential part of the community. And even the royal courts had a fool, a very important figure. although that figure probably was just pretending to be a fool, and that was one of the most, sometimes very influential position in a royal court, but also one of the most dangerous jobs you could have, because you could lose your head at any moment. But only the fool was able to tell the king or queen what was wrong, by making it into a funny story. But the fool is more deeply connected, as we know from mythology. The fool is more deeply connected with the source still, hasn't gone as far out as a normally developed human. He's more simple. The fool, for example, relatively speaking, is a simpleton. It's like the Hobbit in Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit is a simple guy. Doesn't think in complex terms, loves the simple things of life, loves eating and enjoyment. But why the fool has to go on this important mission that nobody else can carry out? That's a mythological motive. That's often the case, because the fool has a connectedness still with source that the more developed humans don't have. Similar motive in Forrest Gump, the movie. The fool does great things, this guy, Forrest Gump, and life always supports him. If you watch that movie again, he saves people in the war, he does heroic things, but he doesn't claim credit because he doesn't have much of an ego yet. And always life gives him the next thing and the next thing, supports him. But we don't want to go there. When I say cessation of thinking, I'm not talking about regressing to the stage that is the pre-thinking stage of humanity. I'm thinking about rising above, pointing to the possibility of rising above thinking. So you stop thinking, which is normally associated with diminishment of consciousness, and transcendence of thinking is an intensification of consciousness, turning up the light. This is why the term attention and alertness, those terms are extremely important. They're also used in Zen very frequently. The Zen teachings could be described, if you wanted to summarize Zen, you can just say simple things like pay attention. There was one Zen teacher who would, whenever they asked him a question to explain Zen, he became quite famous. He would always raise his finger. Please explain Zen to us. What is Zen? I haven't quite understood yet. He was calling people to attention. Now, this attention, there's a state of attention that sometimes people experience when they are engaged in dangerous activity. You can climb a mountain. Do you think you're doing much thinking when you're hanging on this wall? No, you can't. You have to be absolutely present. In that moment, you have transcended thinking, and the situation is forcing you into complete presence, this highest degree of alertness. Without it, you slip and you're gone. And so this high degree of alertness, however, has no tension in it. In the case of somebody practicing dangerous sport, yes, there is physical tension, but the state itself has no tension in it, and you do not need to engage in a dangerous activity in order to enter that state. We are entering it here, because even as I talk about it, I hope, well, I don't really hope anything, but I trust that as I speak about it, simultaneously to listening to it, you can verify in yourself this state of attention, which is a state of very high alertness, but there's no tension in it. It's not the alertness that sometimes goes with fear, and you go, but it's not, that's really a contraction of the entire body. It's not really alertness. So that's not it. It's a relaxed alertness. There's both yin and yang in it, coming together, and it's that. I also mentioned the other day, when you first look at something for the first few seconds, a new vista, a new landscape, you enter a room, or you step out of a room into the open, or whatever it is, or suddenly something new comes into your into your perceptual field. In the first 2 or 3 seconds, you don't know what it is. You have to first take it in. There's a moment of alert presence. But usually you're only aware of the sense perception. You're not aware of the background of the alert presence itself. But you can be aware of the alert presence itself as you take it in. And that's the key. So you're not just alertly present, you're aware of the field of alert presence in yourself, so to speak, as yourself. And the awareness of it and it are the same thing. Cessation of thinking. Now, you can try it. Even now, I would suggest that as I'm speaking, you may find, you may not know this yet, in the moments when I'm not speaking, like now, and now, and now, if you're alert, you're not thinking, you're just present. And now, there's just an alert field of presence. So, some of you may not be able yet to be totally free of thinking, but I believe that most people are able to, they have short gaps of no thought, pure awareness, or no thought. Just a short. And then you look around. In that moment, your personal sense of self has receded. In a moment of pure presence, which is just this, you have no memories and you have no expectations for future. Because you have no thought. But you haven't fallen asleep. You're very awake. In that moment, you're not a person anymore. What are you? Just a field of consciousness, conscious presence. Something has emerged from within you and has taken place of the person. The person is still there, it's just gone receded. If the only thing you achieve in life is this, that you are able to be free of compulsive and addictive thinking, if you're able to, almost one could say, to choose not to think when there's nothing in particular to think about, when you can just be present. So in other words, if you can step out of thinking into aware presence, that alert space, then that is the greatest thing you could achieve in this lifetime, that any human could achieve in this lifetime. And yet there's nobody left to say, I have achieved it. That's the problem for the ego. The ego would love to say, oh, I have achieved the state of presence. So it's not an achievement. I'm just saying it's an achievement, but it's not really. Because you didn't do it. You got out of the way and then it happened. I will probably be talking for most of the time, but there may be quite a few gaps of stillness in between the words, as they are now. And these gaps are very important. I would even say more important than the words. If you become conscious of these gaps of stillness in between words, you notice the gaps instead of just impatiently being in your conceptual mind and saying, why is he talking so slowly? Why hasn't he said anything significant yet? If you are able to notice the gaps, give them attention, that is the arising of that state of consciousness that we call presence. It is a state of alertness, relaxed alertness, clarity, a state in which the conceptual mind has come to a rest and something else arises. Thinking is most people's normal state of when they are awake in conventional terms. And when you become aware of these gaps, thinking subsides and presence, or we call it awareness, arises. Thinking subsides, presence arises. Of course, thinking will come back, but it has briefly, momentarily subsided. Something else has emerged. And that is what we call presence. It is a state of, one could say, pure awareness or pure consciousness. So that is what sometimes people hope to achieve in when they actually do formal meditations. A meditation is a good tool, but it's not enough. It's not even for everybody. The most important thing is to bring that state of clear, alert presence into everyday life.
I haven't gone through physical death yet, as the Zen master who was asked about life after death said, I don't know. And they said, why don't you know? You're the master. And he said, yeah, but I'm not a dead master. But I've gone very deeply to what one could call death to identification with form, So in a way I have gone into that realm from where I can say and know that ultimately what we see as death is the dissolution of form, that the eternal in us, which I know that firsthand, cannot be touched by that. So what exactly happens, I would say, depends on whatever state of consciousness you were in. That was your predominant state of consciousness in this lifetime. If in this lifetime you were continuously identified with form, your body, or the psychological form of me, that means consciousness, this expression of consciousness, was still in a somewhat dreamlike state, which is identification with form. And you can easily extrapolate from that if the tendency of consciousness to identify with form was still there, which in other ways the awakening had not happened. This tendency will continue. There will be further identification with form, and the process will continue as the consciousness that is not yet fully awake will continue to identify with form again, and then gradually come to a place where awakening happens. Or if there has already been a disidentification from form in this lifetime, then you can extrapolate from there that the compulsive urge to identify with form and to seek another form or another cycle of form identification, this compulsion to seek further experiences through identifying with form then would either be much weaker or be completely absent, in which case the consciousness that you are is no longer bound to this realm and will not seek to re-experience the realm of form. But in either case, you really, I can tell you that all is well. It does not really matter whether this person now needs further experiences of identification, in which case this will happen, or whether he's already free of this urge, in which case he will move on and live in a realm that we can't even conceive of from where we are here. I get a sense deep within in the forms of what that is, but we don't need to talk about it here. All we know is nothing. This is the beginning of A Course in Miracles, which is the entire Course in Miracles summarized in 2 lines. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. That which is real in him is beyond form. Anybody can know that when you see a dead body, you realize that this is no longer whom you knew. This is not the being that you knew. This is only a shell. So nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal ultimately exists. This is why sages from all traditions speak of this realm of form as ultimately illusory. It depends what level you look at. The important thing is all is well. Beyond the appearance on the level of form, which is the only level where death exists, it is the transition from one form into another form, or from one form into formlessness. That is what death is, no more than that. Nothing real dies. Nothing real dies. Which is to say, ultimately, there is no such thing as death. There only seems to be. It's a transmutation of form. Either form dissolves or seeks some other form, some other identification with form.
And the moment you watch the screen, whether it's television or on the screen, you might have noticed that your so-called own thought processes come to a stop. So to some extent, you're free of the self. This is why people sometimes find watching television relaxing. Say, okay, I just need to relax now, let's turn it on. By this they mean, while they watch the television screen, they're not burdened by their self-induced thought processes. What they do, however, they replace their own thoughts with the collective thoughts. So you're not in a state of thoughtless awareness when you watch television or you watch something on the screen. You absorb the thoughts from there into your mind, and you link into. So for people often in a state of semi or hypnosis when they watch, and it kind of paralyzes you. It can also happen with the screen, with television already started, of course. I don't know whenever 60 years ago, whenever television started, and you go, and so your mind is just absorbing whatever is playing. It's the TV mind, which is receiving stuff from wherever it comes from, is going into your mind, and you become no longer thinking your own thoughts. Occasionally you might, you say, oh, this guy is so stupid, and then you're watching again. And then another thought, why am I watching this rubbish? Half an hour later, this is so awful. But you can't turn it off. Here's the remote. Let's just try one more channel. There might be something else there. Oh no, that's stupid. Try one more. This is how an addict behaves, and the device is even more addictive. Because you carry them with you, and you may have to admit that there's an addiction in you. Not everybody here, but quite a few. It would be almost normal to feel this draw towards it, and you use it even when you don't need to use it. That's the amazing thing. When you're standing at the elevator, waiting, so another person is standing next to you, and he or she is pulling out the phone, and then you pull out yours. You don't know why. Or anywhere you're ordering a tea or coffee somewhere, and you're standing in line, and if you look around, there's almost nobody, and probably nobody, who is not looking at this little thing. This is scary. Zombie-like. Is religion necessary? It depends who you are on the level of the form. For some people, it can be necessary or helpful for two reasons. It can provide the more superficial reason. It can give your life a certain amount of structure, which for some people can be helpful. Regular practice. Gives you a feeling of comfort. Some people have too little structure in their lives, and others have too much already. If you have too little structure in your life, then religion can provide that. More importantly, on another level, religion can either obscure the spiritual dimension within yourself, and often it does, or if used rightly, if approached rightly, if understood on a deeper level, it can help you access and stay in connectedness
with that deeper level of yourself or the transcendent dimension of consciousness. Whether or not you need it, only you can know. Whether you find it either helpful or a hindrance, it can be either, depends on you as a person, your past, what function it had in your past, and so on. It is a hindrance if religion becomes an ideology. Then it operates only on the level of the mind, and is very similar to any other kind of ideology that you may believe in, whether it's communism as an ideology, or any political theory, or anything that explains the universe. It could be a metaphysical system that you completely believe in, philosophical system, and so on. So an ideology is something that takes possession of your mind and exerts a controlling function, and it can influence almost your entire mental functioning if it becomes something of overwhelming power in your mind. It's a little thought that grows into a huge thing in your mind, and the tentacles reach into every aspect of your mind, and there are religious people like that. Usually you can recognize that it is an ideology by the fact that they are not peaceful human beings, and by the fact that they have enemies, either even within their own religion or another religion. Anybody who does not agree with their ideology becomes an enemy. In the same way that people who were, not nowadays that many, were deeply believing in communism, which was a wonderful idea to start with, of course. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. It was a beautiful idea of equality. Everybody the same. That is wonderful. No personal possessions sounds wonderful too. And the only mistake was it was imposed from outside by people who themselves has not gone beyond the egoic state of consciousness. They just played it in their mind as, that's a good idea. And then it was imposed on other people who also were not in that state of consciousness. But most importantly, those who imposed the idea on others forced them to live it out. The ideal became contaminated with ego. So when these people came to power, their egos became inflated to an enormous degree, almost to absurdity, and without realizing it, they reenacted the same evils, in some cases worse than those that they were fighting against.
For some incredible Bruce Lipton motivation, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
The movie The Matrix, everyone thinks science fiction. I go, no, that's a documentary. Everybody got programmed. That's a fact. That's a biological reality. Right. But what was interesting, they always say, well, there's a red pill, and if you take the red pill, you get out of the program. And I go,